So this was a formal agency file that described how a CIA case officer made contact with people from the mob, organized crime, with offers of payoffs, with very detailed logistics. It also describes a really interesting Jeffrey Epstein-like figure. Robert Mayhew was a CIA asset. The JFK files, they describe how they got, they sponsored a movie to simulate, I believe it was the president of Indonesia, having an affair with a blonde woman. They filmed basically like a porno that would, and to create a tape. And they describe how they set up the room to make it look like it was, I think in the presidential palace or some hotel room that would have been in that country, in order to create what's effectively a sexual blackmail tape that could then be leaked to the press in order to discredit the president. And you look at these in formal agency files, and on the one hand, you go, okay, that was the 1960s. That was the early 1960s. That was before there was any oversight on the CIA at all. It wasn't until the Church Committee hearings in 1975, 1976 that we even had congressional oversight of the CIA. There was no Senate Intelligence Committee. There was no House Intelligence Committee at the time. And at that point, assassinations had not been outlawed. I mean, the CIA was allowed to assassinate people. There's since been a ban on that. So you go, okay, that's 60 years ago. But the fact is they did it. The fact is that is within the array of options that folks in covert operations saw as on the table.
Working with the mob.
Now, but that goes back a long time. I found it totally unsurprising. It's one of these things. It's just kind of the general theme. It's shocked but not surprised. It's like, holy crap, they put this in writing? What are we doing here, guys? But you're like, well, I'm not surprised they did it because I know they were doing all these other things. The fact is the CIA was working with the mob before there was a CIA. Before it was done by the CIA, work with, for example, the Italian mob was done through the Department of War really starting in the 1930s and then especially in the 1940s, because they were the Central Intelligence Agency. Well, at the time it was the OSS in the 1940s, but it would become the CIA. One of their main logistical points of contact and allies for the resistance against Mussolini in Italy. Mussolini was cracking down both on the Vatican Church and on the Italian mafia. And so there were strange bedfellows. There's a great book on this by Paul Williams. I think it was published in 2017. It's called Operation Gladio, the CIA, the Vatican, and the Mob. And I recommend this book to everyone because it's a really, really detailed academic deep dive on this nexus between a religious institution, an intelligence agency, an illegal organized crime syndicate that does all manner of black ops. And it especially focuses on the funding relationship. In fact, this just came out, and this sort of gets to the utility of these documents. There's an incredible document that just was released this week where Larry Summers, who was the head of the U.S. Treasury, so not only was he the head of Harvard University and the head of the American money system, but he says he's trying to explain to Jeffrey Epstein kind of the politics of what's happening in the Vatican. And what he says to him is that what's actually most important going on right now is what's happening with the Vatican Bank, which is kind of the deep politics of the Vatican. And I saw this email and I just laughed and did a little twirly thing in my chair because it's totally unsurprising if you read that book Operation Gladio that I mentioned. It traces 80 years of this because the Vatican Bank was the first offshore bank before offshore banking even existed. There was an alliance with the Vatican Bank during World War II itself with our Department of War and with organized crime outfits, at least according to the evidence that I find persuasive in this book and that appears to be validated by Italian court documents in the 1990s when all this was litigated. Incidentally, that was when the mob was really prosecuted for the first time.